Hello everyone. In this video, we'll try to understand, the difference between OLTP and OLAP. OLTP means online transaction processing, where OLAP is online analytical processing. So these two are the two major, the types of databases. We have different types of, in fact, many types of databases. But when you ask me, to classify broadly, right? So I'll classify into two different types. One is OLTP, another one is OLAP. So we'll just try to understand it, right? So now we'll try to understand the difference between these two, right? So as I told you, OLTP is online transaction processing, OLAP is online analytical processing. Now, OLTP is mainly, it is mainly meant for insert, update, delete commands. It's mainly, you can also perform select operations, but it is mainly meant for insert, update, delete. When you talk about OLAP, it is mainly for select commands to do aggregations, right? For generating the, the insights from the data, right? So when you talk about OLTP, it is used to store the transactional data. When you talk about OLAP, it is used to analyze the transactional data. What do you mean by transactional data? We'll quickly try to understand. If you remember, right? So in our previous video, we talked about what is data, right? So here I have given two different examples, right? For example, in the retail industry, what products purchased by a customer, how many products are sold out, which brands are doing good, how many products are available. All these are transactional data. This particular data will be stored in our OLTP databases. And now I need to analyze, you know, something out of my data. I need to fetch some insights out of my data, like which branch is doing good, which product is selling more, how many customers are visiting of each branch. This is more of analyzing the data. So this kind of analysis typically we'll do in OLAP, right? So we'll have two different databases here. So in OLTP, we'll store all this information, like, what products purchased by customer, all the transactional data, right? And we'll have some other database called OLAP, where, we'll get all this data from OLTP, and, we'll update, we'll put that in OLAP database. In that particular database, we'll do analysis, right? So hope you are clear, right? So transactional data, OLTP is used to store the transactional data, where OLAP is used to analyze the transactional data, right? So typically, when you talk about OLTP, it's a row-oriented database, where OLAP is typically mostly it is column-oriented database. What is row-oriented and column-oriented? These are actually, the interesting, and it makes lots of difference when you talk about the technical architecture of the databases. So now we'll quickly take an example and see how it works. Yeah, so let me jump to the database. Just don't worry about this. So we'll try to understand what is MySQL workbench, what is table in our upcoming videos. Just to differentiate, between the row-oriented and column-oriented database, right? If you see this particular table, I have, the columns like organization ID, product ID, shipment ID, customer ID, sales, right? We have somewhere around 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 columns, right? Now, let's say if I want to fetch only the product ID and shipment ID out of 11 columns, I want to fetch only two columns. In that case, usually when you talk about row-oriented database, like typically OLTP, what happens is it will fetch all the 11 columns from the database, right? Once it fetch all the details from the 11 columns, it will filter out these two particular columns and give it to you. Now what happens? Because of that, you are expecting only two columns, but your database is fetching all the columns and then it is filtering out. So unnecessarily it is reading 9 columns, right? Out of 11 columns, you need two columns, but unnecessarily reading 9 columns. Well, obviously, right? So maybe the overall data may be 2 GB. If you want to fetch only two columns, it may be somewhere around 100 MB, but still, you want to fetch only 100 MB data, but you're fetching all 2 GB data, right? It's because in case of row-oriented database, each row will store in a particular location. Each row will store as a for our understanding, we can say each row will store as a file. So if we have 15 rows here, we'll have 15 different files. Now coming to the column oriented database, uh, you know uh, mostly the OLAP databases, right? It will store each column into a file. Here in case of row oriented, I said each row will be a one file. So here we have 15 rows. Did you see? We have 15 entries. So we'll have 15 files. If we have 1000 entries, 1000 rows, we'll have 1000 files. Where in case of column oriented database, you can have 1000 rows, you have 1 lakh rows. In our case, we have 11 columns, so we'll have only 11 files, right? Which means each column will be stored as a one file, one single file. All the data in this particular column will be stored in a file. In that case, if I really want to fetch two columns, it's very simple, right? I can fetch only these two particular files. I'm ignoring all the 11 columns, right? That's the benefit of column oriented databases, right? And why OLAP is column oriented? Because OLAP database is mainly meant for analyzing your data, which means you have, in the example which I sent is 11 columns, but in real time you have 100 columns, 150 columns, right? You have multiple tables. So in that case, you see when you're doing analysis, you may not need all the columns. You may fetch only a few columns, right? So the retrieval of the data will be huge in case of OLAP. So OLAP is mainly meant for, reading the data with select operation, and we do lot of aggregations, all of things, right? So as we are doing lot of data retrieval, obviously each column will, if we are able to store each column in a file, so we can fetch what are the column we want. So remaining columns we can simply ignore it, right? So when you talk about OLTP, so coming back, the difference between OLAP and OLTP, when you talk about OLTP, so the main source of data is from the transaction, right? So the transactions are your main source of data, right? When you talk about OLAP, so OLAP is not the source of the data. So OLTP is the source of the data. When you talk about OLAP, the source of OLAP is a different OLTP databases, right? So OLTP is mainly designed for real-time business operations. OLAP is designed for analyzing your data, right? So OLTP database can have thousands of users, where OLAP database will have only few tens or hundreds of users. And when you talk about OLTP, so mostly the web applications, mobile applications, the operation systems like ERP systems, CRM, they typically use, not typically, they use OLTP, right? And who use OLAP? Right, obviously who wants to know how their business are going, like the business team, CEO, CXO, I mean all the CXO teams uses OLAP database. I mean they don't I mean when I say use, they don't write queries on top of databases. So they, because they need the data, right? So they need to analyze the data, right? They, so because see, as I told you in our previous video, right? So if you want to drive your business, first you should understand your data, right? Then only you can drive your business. So for understanding the data, we'll use OLAP databases. Hope I'm able to differentiate between OLTP and OLAP databases. So in very high level, this OLAP databases, right? So we can also call it as a data warehouse. Maybe I'll make one more clear video where I'll talk only about OLAP. So in our upcoming videos, we mostly talk about OLTP databases, which is MySQL, as we discussed, right? So hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you.